1. AKOMA greetings.
Here's why you should be celebrating AKOMA Day instead of Valentine's Day.
First, you got to accept that all people who love themselves have holidays that reflect their own cultural heritage.
The key crisis in the African American life is a cultural crisis. That is, the views and values. Until we break the monopoly oppression has on our mind, liberation is not only impossible, but unthinkable.
So when we talk about culture, we need to define culture. And we say here, this is a Coleman House Initiative definition. Culture is a group value system that emanates from the original nature of its members, that manifests as thought, speech, action, sensory perception, emotional response, symbol creation and recognition, logic progression, and formulaic presentation. That's a mouthful, which is then transmitted repeatedly through all 12 areas of people activity: education, economics, entertainment, fashion, food, health, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. I love the way Marimba Ani says it.
Culture is a people's immune system. This is one of our favorite quotes
And that's
by one
so
of our
important.
favorite
Yeah,
people.
as people are talking about immune systems recently.
And this is why you should be celebrating AKOMA Day instead of Valentine's Day.
So, first, we want to look at the iconic symbol. This is the first thing that we must correct as Black people throughout the world. If nothing else, this is so important for us to understand. The symbol that we are commonly miscalling the heart is actually an akoma. If we would embrace that, it would be a seismic shift in consciousness on the earth. It is an ancient African symbol that is not the organ that is in our chest.
And even for the organ in your chest, there's a lot more symbolism when you come to an indigenous African understanding of even our body parts that has you understand what it means to have a heart, to take heart, to do something from heart, to memorize by heart, to lead with the heart, to follow the heart. All of those things actually have another layer of meaning that is so important for us to know that nothing is just, quote, air quote, the organ.
Right. I love the way you always say the word courage comes from the core, and the origin of it is the heart.
And you must have courage to love, right?
Absolutely. So, to be specific, if you look at the African symbol called the akoma, starting at the bottom tip, it represents the spiritual realm where man and woman are one being before conception. This is a literal understanding and not just a symbolic understanding. The upward arcs represent the separation from the spiritual unity and the transfer into the physical world by supplanting into the womb of a woman and another woman, then advancing forth as male and female. The humps represent the trials of growth and the development by way of cultural rites that transition girls and boys into womanhood or manhood. And the connecting point represents the sacred science of soulmating, the art and science of Black love culture, and a divine reunification, pointing back to the spiritual origin for eternal guidance. So, this is what the symbol actually means, and we've tried to visualize it. I think we did visualize it very well in our company logo. So, you'll see this Soulmate Twins logo in all of our work.
So there's a big difference between superficial celebration of holiday and something that really comes more from the heart.
Right.
We have to be able to understand that when we're doing something that's indigenous to us as Black people, it's going to have a lot of layers of meaning and a lot of, magic and alchemy behind it. And this is, our symbolic representation of our beliefs and our values. When we celebrate holidays and we don't really understand where they're coming from, we don't understand that we're actually participating in the value system and the belief system of our oppressors. So, when it comes to Valentine's Day is very much about ownership of women. It's very much about abuse, right? And I think it's really interesting because a lot of women want to celebrate Valentine's Day
Ironic.
as the honoring of us as a woman, as the honoring of intimate love versus some of the other things like Mother's Day, or our birthdays and even anniversaries. And something that we don't understand that comes along with Valentine's Day is the literal whipping of women with pieces of skin that were at one point called febra in order for us to be fertile. And this is a natural time of fertility all around the world. This is the
Right.
most fertile time. Then if you're in the United States, where we are in North America, this is literally the coming of spring, right? That we would be celebrating Valentine's Day and or what people used to celebrate in Europe and celebrating Lupercalia. So it's really important for us to understand that we don't want to be whipped, we don't want to be abused, we don't want to be
Chosen
siphoned
against our
off
will.
for just sex, right? Some of the things that came along with the fertility practices of Europeans. And we're not up for ownership or, use, just bodily use when it comes to sex and procreating. And it's really important for us to understand that we are partnered with a divine soulmate. And from an indigenous perspective, we have the oldest story of soulmate, the oldest story of divine love, the oldest stories, the oldest values, the oldest practices that actually
Monuments,
have to deal with
words.
an equal and divine partnership as opposed to ownership.
When you look at these pictures, you see Romulus and Remus with the goats. If you're familiar with Roman Greco lore, and a pregnant woman being whipped with the febra skin, where we get that word February from, and so many things about this festival, Lupercalia, were just insane and counterproductive to love in comparison to the African man and the African woman, Mancho and Nawasha on the other side, representing love in divinity. So it's a juxtaposition, it's something to think about. So when we look at St. Valentine's Day, what I think is so funny is that in an effort to sanitize the psychohistory of Lupercalia and its development, Europeans, the Catholic Church, and others tried to put a religious overtone to Valentine's Day. And I want to say that this holiday, in its origin, in its amalgamation, in its creation, where they just made it up, it has nothing to do with any religion. Now it's been associated with a saint to actually brain stain the people and make them think that there was some saint of love that was going around. Even when you look at this picture of St. Valentine's Day, he has the X of resurrection and the P that represents Asar, hijacking African symbolism. And there are many Valentines. There's a story about the Pope Claudius the second, I believe, who didn't want the men of the army to marry, and his daughter, quote unquote, fell in love, whatever that means, with Valentine, and he was arrested, put in jail, and then they were sending correspondence, and he signed, um, or she wrote "My Valentine," and so now we have this tradition, and there's many other stories. All of them are ridiculous, and they have really no meaning, but we've been mystified by it. On the other side, Mancho and Nawashi Idu are clinical therapists. We are cultural initiates of multiple decades in various African spiritual systems, including African Nubian Kushite Kemetic, um, Dagara Dogon, Botswana, etc., etc. So this is a juxtaposition that we should really look at and consider when we're striving to edify something that's supposed to be love.
And we're going to look at a couple of other things that we can see next to each other and clarify our values and our beliefs around love. One of the things that I think always comes up when it comes to Cupid, kind of right after St. Valentine, if people even look for the iconography of St. Valentine, is Cupid. So everyone sees Cupid. Little children know who Cupid is, kind of,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what most people don't know is that Cupid also had arrow tips to make people hate each other. So a lot of
Right.
times we say, oh, someone's, shot by Cupid's bow or Cupid's arrow. And I just don't know why I fell in love, right? The story and the mythology behind Cupid is that he was mischievous, a
Right,
mischievous kind of little boy
right.
that could make two people fall in love when they didn't want to be in love. So it could be relatives, it could be dangerous for those two people to be obsessed with each other and infatuated, or he can make people hate each other. Then that could have been a husband and a wife who should have been in love. It could have been family. It could have been, actual good partnership, but that at his whim, he was really making those decisions. And I think that this goes along with the story of falling in love and that we don't have any control over it and that it is random and based on a whim. And that it's actually not coming from any kind of indigenous story on love. Where on the other hand, we have Ma'at, which is perfect harmony and balance. This is the order of the universe, and this speaks to the divine order of a soulmate pair and soulmate twins that we would come together to have divine purpose. So, really being able to understand that the organization of culture is coming from the order of Ma'at, which is our truth, justice, balance, order, reciprocity, propriety, and harmony. So these things are what you need to actually have a relationship function. And it's also not an accident that things come together. And I think that this is really important to understand so that when you're showing iconography to children, that a whole story comes along with it. Things get introduced to us at such an early age that I don't think people even look up St. Valentine and wonder where it comes from. I don't think people actually look up Cupid. We take for granted that we're in a culture that honors European values, and that comes from a lot of
Symbols.
Roman
Right.
and Greek symbolism. And we don't understand that a lot of their symbolism is a fraction or partially based on our own. So it's always important for us to go back to the original. And for us, the original of this particular culture, the standard would have been Ma'at.
Right. And when we look at Cupid, we're looking at, many people say that the popularized Casper, the ghost, the friendly ghost, who has both a endearing kind of reception and a fearful reception. So there was a trepidation around Cupid appearing. It wasn't just like, oh, it's 1,000 songs in Black culture about Cupid, but not about the real story of Cupid. It is just, quote unquote, fantasizing about what Cupid actually was. But my aunt, look at how beautiful she is. Look at her. And the weighing of the heart with the feather, the scales, so much of Ma'at has been hijacked as the blind lady of justice, and justice is blind. And but what we love about this image is that as we're talking about love and we're talking about the organ of love, the psychological heart, we're talking about your soul. And in intimate relationships, we're constantly weighing, is this good or is it not? We ain't looking for no arrows in love. We looking for a weigh and judgment. Are you being good to me? Am I being good to myself? And am I being good to you? And ma'at is the basis. And you see her in the Kess pose that they stole and made a proposal pose and a night pose, but it represents your one leg being grounded in your culture and the other leg being up in a 90-degree angle to represent your morality. So that's beautiful.
Another thing that I think we don't necessarily understand when it comes to some of the practices around Valentine's Day is that we would typically not offer flowers that have been cut as a symbol for love that we want to continue and expand and to grow. So when it comes to indigenous culture, we would plant a flower or we would create a garden and we would have a kind of symbolism that says, I have to nurture this thing, care for this thing, and I'm expecting it to keep growing. And that because this is alive, it will continue to expand. So we'll be able to have many, many flowers in this cycle. We'll be able to see our love and our relationship go through the cycle of seeding, germinating, growing, flowering, and even,
Harvesting,
decaying,
right.
but only to come back around. The thing about when you actually cut flowers they are going to die. That's the one thing that you know is that as soon as you cut them, they're actually on their way to death. And so typically we wouldn't do a kind of cultivation around giving flowers for a holiday. And we spend a lot of money on Valentine's Day, but just in flowers, it's a couple $1 billion. So there's a whole industry that's cultivated around growing flowers only to kill them. And I think that that's definitely something that is not
Geological destruction.
in the indigenous understanding of love or the indigenous understanding of cultivation. We know that we need to use something or we want to use something, but we would probably, in most original cultures around the world, and definitely in a Black African original culture, we would not plant more than what we so called need, right? So to overproduce only to cut them and kill them as a sign of love is actually
Insanity.
actually there's a little bit of a conflict there,
Yeah.
and it is insanity. So we have to be mindful about the symbolism that we give. Flowers are very beautiful, but it's much better for us to plant them, nurture them, or actually take someone to a botanical garden and experience them as they should be.
Right, right. So we're looking at billions of dollars, but billions of dollars on what? What are we spending this money on? This is every year in a nation, in a world where there's all kinds of challenges that we could address as an act of love. We spending money on what?
And I think when we first started talking about Valentine's Day, it was $16 billion. I'm going to give you 2 seconds to think. How much money do you think we're going to spend on Valentine's Day this year? I think that the prediction is up to $25 billion. So this is really interesting because to me, the amount of money that we spend goes up every single year. And we are spending money on going out, primarily on getting clothes, definitely on the couple billions in flowers, and on jewelry, which all of those types of things can actually be doing harm to us and
Right.
our relationships. If we're getting jewelry and we're getting diamonds and gold that's not properly extracted from the earth, that people aren't actually compensated for, then we're actually doing some destructive things towards
Right.
each other around the planet.
Right.
If we're spending money on clothes, again, it's something that we're just going to wear this one time, or we're just going to wear it, and be renewed. You can't repeat an outfit or any of those types of things. We're just creating things for the landfill, like truthfully, and if we're going to spend money on eating out, it should be the places that we should be circulating our dollar. So we're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars, and this is just as a nation. So the United States money, according to the National Retail Federation, we're going to spend about $200 per person towards this holiday of Valentine's Day, right? It's so much more important for us whether we're getting together in intimately for love, for intimate love, or we're coming
Mm-hmm.
together just as friend groups, which people do in the United States around Valentine's Day. It's important for us to be conscious because, as Mansha was saying, we could address something with 1 or 2 billion, but we could eradicate some things with 25 billion. If
Right.
this was and this is perpetually an annual
Every year.
multiple billions every single year.
Every
So the
year.
expectation is potentially that we could get up to 26, 27, 30 as things get more expensive, as we end up
More
spending.
people start spending.
Exactly. So what's really important for us, especially under the name of love, is to say what could we be spending billions of dollars on and actually address and or completely eradicate that would show love for each other, love for our community, and love in the world.
So why the 14th to the 20th? Well, if you go back to Lupercalia, the holiday, the Greco-Roman holiday, you will see that it's based on an even older African tradition, which we are not currently sure of the name of. It's probably in one of those library books in the Vatican or somewhere. But this 14th to 20th, this third week of February, represents one of the most fertile times on earth where more love is being demonstrated, spring is arising, and children are being conceived around the world in a great number. Now, I don't know a sociological study today that can prove this is the week where most people are being conceived. But at a time when Lupercalia was developed and it was based on an African holiday, this was the week that was the most fertile in the world. So, realigning with our ancestral legacy, we created AKOMA Day initially as a day, but then to be a week to address this tradition that is ancient.
So, another thing that is so important is what we know as counselors. Many people feel isolated and alone around Valentine's Day. Many people feel they're questioning their
Right,
relationship because it's not living up to the hype of the
right.
commercials. Maybe it's not even living up to the $200 that you think you're going to spend on the day. So there's a right before the holiday, as especially with a high level of consumerism and commercialism and materialism, the Valentine's Day holiday can actually kind of start around the end of January. So once the New Year's over, you start kind of seeing the pink and the red in the stores, and right then is where a lot of people feel isolated and alone
Hmm.
because they're anxious about the holiday coming up. So either they're saying, I should have broke up with this person already, my
Hmm.
relationship is not where it should be, we're going through a problem, and it should not be like that again because of some of the mythology that we've been taught about love. What can happen is building up to the holiday, we can have some more stress in our relationship, some depression, not wanting to watch the movies that are out or see the products as we run our errands. And it creates a sense of really being alone, which is the opposite of love. The love is actually a unifier. And it's the acknowledgement of how we're all connected. Like we said, whether it's about flowers, whether it's about where we spend our money, we actually are interrelated and interconnected in everything that we do. But when there is a skew to the perspective, we can feel something that's untrue. And so it's really important for us to not have something superficial, but to understand that we are actually in divine unity. And when we have the opportunity or we create the opportunities for intimate love, we're actually manifesting divine unity on earth, right? Because we have the masculine and the feminine coming together in a sacred way that really shows and proves the Most High or God or divinity. And we need to be able to know that that's where we came from to arrive on the planet. And that's what we have the opportunity to participate in as we find love and find our soulmate.
Yeah, I want to participate in that picture on the left. So when we look at the iconography, the symbols of AKOMA Day versus Valentine's Day, in AKOMA Day, we're looking at 7 days, 7 symbols that represent the art and science of Black love culture. Each symbol is meaningful and actually is outlined in the AKOMA Day book what the 7 symbols are and the unified principles that they represent. When it comes to Valentine's Day, other than the hijacking of the AKOMA symbol and the color red and sometimes pink, we don't have any idea what this is supposed to mean. In AKOMA Day, the red is for the blood of the people, but also the symbol of the ancestors. Whenever you see red in African culture, you're looking at the ancestors of the progeny that is wearing the red. The pink represents the psychological, emotional, sociological, and physical intimacy. When you look into the 9 holes of the body, you see pink. So it represents intimacy. White always represents purification and the blankness of initiation. So whenever you see African people going into initiation, they're wearing white, like at a wedding. That's an initiation into love. So a lot of people still carry that very African tradition. Yes, it is an African tradition to wear that white into initiating, like we do into weddings. But when we look at Valentine's Day, some of this stuff, I don't know what it's supposed to represent. I have been researching for years to find out what does the polar bear represent with Valentine's Day. And the only thing I could come up with is that Europeans need a symbol that represents themselves psychologically, and nothing else speaks to their isolation, migration, and their phenotypical energy like a polar bear. That's all I could come up with. So when we look at AKOMA Day, we often talk about word purge and word cultivation because we have been brain stained and we need a brain washing. A lot of times we say so and so is brainwashed. Actually, their brain has been stained and it needs a washing. And so we're very bullish about words and terms. We have word purge and word cultivation are two terms that were given to us by one of our premier jegnas, Baba Heru Akra Samad Sepata, right? And so we don't want to fall in love because falling in love denotes helplessness or a process of chance that can happen accidentally, is behind the false idea that we can fall in and out of love. We want to rise in love or stand in love or be building in love because that reflects the understanding that love is service and will only increase with proper nurturing of virtues and principles that require deliberate action.
So some things that you can say instead, right, are ni akoma,
Nyakoma,
akame akoma,
I love
akoma
your style.
intoaso,
My heart is
and
linked and greatly
makoma
amplified.
womu.
My heart is into you. That's beautiful.
And really being able to be much more intentional with what we actually mean, even if we're only speaking whatever language we're speaking, especially whatever colonized language we're speaking. It's important for us to say as much as we can, say what we mean, and make sure that we trade out things that don't have the meaning that we intend for ones that have the meaning that we intend.
You know, we always say what you mean and mean what you say. Because we are unified people. And to that point, AKOMA Day is communal. And as a communal people, we do various different rituals. This is a beautiful ritual that was led by Mut, Queen Afua, the legendary spiritual cultural guide and sage of our people here in the West and really around the world. She is our spiritual godmother. But this was AKOMA Day 2010, I believe. And Queen Afua led the entire audience that was there in a beautiful ritual. The men on one side, the women on the other side. But I love this picture because in the back, we see our youth and our elders witnessing the unification and the pledge of Black men and Black women together. You had to be there to see it. It was phenomenal.
AKOMA Day is celebrated in 16 countries and counting. And I believe that it's going around the world no matter what language we're
Right.
speaking, no matter what landmass we find ourselves on, because there's a universal understanding of Black culture. So people want to celebrate something from their perspective. People want to have something that actually empowers them and makes them feel more fulfilled in love, more confident. And that's what AKOMA Day is. So if you want to celebrate AKOMA Day, you should check out the AKOMA Day book and start celebrating in your community, in your relationship, in your family, and yourself, really embracing those virtues and principles that are from Ma'at and from a grounded understanding of love and also a divine understanding of love.
Nia Koma.